and welcome to episode 17 of the Instruction Booklet. My name is Jeremy, I'm your host, and I'm joined always by the man who believes that Bleach is peak anime, and that is my co-host, Michael Pons. Michael, how are you?
So, this is the only time I'll ever say this directly, because I don't want to let Adam Pickens get the satisfaction of knowing this. I'm being a little bit sarcastic.
Oh, okay.
However, the 1,000-Year Blood War really is that good. Like, I don't know if you've watched it at all.
I haven't.
I have to say, there is nostalgia here, right? Because Bleach, growing up, was one of my favorite shonen anime. I liked it more than Naruto and One Piece. Like, I get that some people find its writing a little bit inconsistent, but it's so stylish. Like, Kubo's character design is so good. Even the side characters. I mean, he makes these side characters that their designs are so cool that they could be literally like the protagonist of a show, and then they die in like 2 episodes, and it's sad.
That sounds like I really like Hunter x Hunter has that, where they are like these random side characters. You're like, oh, this guy's really cool, and he's dead.
Yeah, Bleach does that a lot.
Yeah,
but the 1,000-Year Blood War is, I mean, it's cinema. It's so good. The production quality is amazing. They're improving on the manga, actually. In some interesting ways. They're actually adding more content that didn't make it into the manga. Contemporary speculation is that Kubo was rushed and dealing with health issues when the manga was first written. I don't know to what extent that's true, but clearly now that he's getting kind of a do-over, he's going back in and expanding in a way that I think is going to make the 1,000-Year Blood War the definitive way to experience, or the anime is going to be the definitive way to experience that arc.
He's reverse George R.R. Martining it.
Yeah, he's making the TV show better.
Yeah, instead of spitballing ideas and then watching it utterly fail, so he can eventually change the books.
Yeah,
I
have heard
that's what Martin's doing.
Yeah, I don't know to what extent Martin is involved in House of the Dragon. But I have heard Martin express that certain elements of House of the Dragon are actually better than his original.
I've heard it's a really good show. I haven't watched it yet, so
it's so good. It's so good. Season 2 was a little bit, whatever. It was kind of a build-up season towards the conflict that's ultimately going to be coming in season 3. But I guess they wanted to catch their breath a little bit after season 1 was so explosive.
Yeah, it's the Westworld season 3 that eventually leads to the season 4. Yeah,
though it's better than Westworld season 3.
Fair. So
I have strong feelings about Westworld.
Oh yeah, we'll have to save that for like a random episode one day.
Yeah, we'll do an episode on Red Dead, and we'll just surprise an episode about Westworld.
JK, we're not talking about Red Dead. We're talking about Westworld.
Yeah.
So all right. Well, as per always, as we start these shows off, we talk about what we've been watching and entertaining and reading. So what you been reading and other stuff you've been up to lately, Michael?
I've been busy. My semester started up again. I'm teaching a class. I'm TAing for another class, and then I am continuing to work on my dissertation. So I've been reading some stuff for that. But on the side, I'm watching Bleach because it just came back literally last weekend.
Yeah.
I am painting a Blood Bowl a Blood Bowl team. I wanted to get back into painting miniatures, and Warhammer's kind of expensive, and I wouldn't feel satisfied not having a complete army, so I went for Blood Bowl minis instead.
Yeah.
And I watched the first episode of Dan to Dan yesterday.
Oh, what'd you think?
I really liked it. I mean, it's weird, obviously, and I was, concerned about some things that were seemingly going to happen in the first episode that I felt uncomfortable with, but, they didn't.
Yeah, So I've read the entire. I'm like up to date on reading it. So it coming out has been like exciting for me. I watched it. I love the first episode. The team, Science Sabua, I think is the name. They're the same people who did Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. Like they do a great job with animation. And as I've had like two different people now like come up to me and be like, yo, so that first episode, I'm like, look, there is a little bit of uncomfortableness.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm gonna keep watching it. It's very, very fun.
Sweet.
I also caught up with Chainsaw Man.
The manga. Okay, so I'm up to date too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm current as far as the volumes are concerned. I don't read it issue to issue, but
okay, so I might be a little bit ahead of you on that.
Yeah, probably 1 or 2 issues maybe.
Without super spoilery, I will say that I love the new character.
Yeah, she is. I think she's a better protagonist than Denji.
Mm-hmm.
I actually like her more, and that's not. I don't dislike Denji, but something about Asa is just so great.
Yeah, her dynamic with her other half is what is very interesting to me.
Yeah, if the show if the series was more about her at this point onward, I would be totally fine with that.
That's fair.
But yeah, and then I want to play Silent Hill 2.
Yeah.
And I want to play Metaphor because apparently Metaphor is getting great reviews, and I've never actually played an Atlas RPG before, including Persona. I know I need to.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I've never played a Persona game, but I keep hearing apparently Atlas was so confident in Metaphor that the demo is the first 4 dungeons.
Yep.
So
apparently you can play the demo and keep your save file and upload it into the main game once it comes out, so you can pick up right where the demo leaves off.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
That's sweet.
So yeah, what about you?
Let's see. I blame you for this, but I've gotten hooked on Hearthstone Battlegrounds now.
Dude, it's so addictive.
It's so I was like, I'd been playing Magic Arena for like a hot minute, and I was just like, okay, I'm kind of bored. I was like, you know what? I'll check out this Hearthstone Arena thing. And I sunk like 4 hours into it on like the first go, and I was like, holy shit, this is addictive as hell. Yeah.
It really does have that like one more game quality.
And it's free. And it scratches that itch. Like, so in terms of like Magic the Gathering, I've always been a limited player. I love drafting. I love like building decks, and Hearthstone Battlegrounds scratches that itch of like, I'm thinking about what I'm building. I'm looking for synergies, like, right. And then me and Shane got into duos, and I was like, oh, this duos thing's like playing Two-Headed Giant in Magic, except for I can pass cards with my friends, and there's like all these other synergies. So
duos is great.
Yeah, I very much was like, I'm glad you brought it up and that I got to play it, and now that I'm like playing it, I'm trying to pull other people in because I'm just like, y'all, this is really fun.
And you know what's nice is like I have a very impulsive penchant for spending money when I get interested in things. Mm-hmm. I will, when I got into Magic the Gathering Arena, I probably played it for a month or 2 at most, and I probably spent more money than I would care to admit.
Yeah.
Hearthstone Battlegrounds, I mean, you can buy the Tavern Pass.
Right.
For what, $10-15?
I think it's 15.
Yeah, and I do, because that to me is fine. Like, I don't mind. But if I wanted to spend more money, I couldn't. I literally couldn't. I mean, I could buy cosmetics, but otherwise, I'm on the same playing field as everybody else for no extra cost.
Yeah. I like the model of like games, free games that are like, yeah, you can play and you can spend money, but the spending the money part only gives you cosmetics.
Right. Spend money to look cool.
Yeah, I like that. That is a good. Yeah. That was like when I played Rumbleverse, I paid for the battle pass because I wanted some cool costumes. So
yeah, I think that's totally reasonable.
So yeah, I did that. I read a good ways into Masters of Doom, which we'd be talking about that later in the episode about some of the crazy shit that happened between John Romero and John Carmack in their early days. I watched the first episode of Dan to Dan. I'm currently watching Freerin, which has been very good. It's an interesting take on like fantasy, like anime.
Yeah, I heard Freyrin's really good.
Yeah, I've been really surprised. Let's see. I think in the time between our last episode and this one, I went and saw Beetlejuice.
Right, that was good.
It was very fun. The last 20 minutes of that movie is just a giant musical.
Nice.
Went and saw that.
Like Joker.
And I went and saw they re-released Ninja Scroll in theaters. So me and a buddy went and rewatched it, and it was really funny. So we got to the theater, we sat down, and we were the only two there. So like the credits, the opening part starts up, and because it was the 30th anniversary, they actually did like a whole like nice little like 30-minute interview with the director. Which was kind of cool, like hearing some of the stuff, like finding out that him and McTaggart, the guy who directed Die Hard, were like friends.
That's cool.
So this old guy walks in and sits down like right in front of us. And at first I was like, oh my God, in this giant empty theater, you choose this seat. So about like halfway through this guy turns around and goes, what movie is this? And I was like, this is Ninja Scroll. And this dude just goes, shit, I'm in the wrong theater. Because at first I was like, there's like a 60-year-old man who likes Ninja Scroll here. I'm not going to hate.
Yeah.
So that was pretty funny. Yeah, I've been playing Hearthstone Battlegrounds. I've also been playing Marvel vs. Capcom collection came out. So I've been playing some MVC2 and some X-Men Children of the Atom, getting my ass beat.
Yep. Have you matched into Justin Wong at all?
I have not matched into Justin Wong, thank God. I also fired back up Street Fighter 6 because Terry Bogard came out.
Oh, yeah.
And they now added the V-Rival system, which is really cool, which has been a great way for me to like learn. Because I've been playing Terry, and Terry's been like a lot of fun. But V-Rivals is it actually matches you against a computer, and it's like it learns how you play, and it will adjust. So it's almost like a way for you to kind of like get better at the game without having to get on ladder and like losing ranks and the nervousness that comes with playing another player.
Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah, so I've been liking that. So yeah, it's supposedly been. I've kind of been like a hold pattern for like big games. I haven't really bought anything like super big lately.
Yeah, I've been waiting.
So
you did remind me just very quickly because I need to mention this. I saw a new A24 film called "I Saw the TV Glow." A couple weeks ago. It's amazing. Okay. I can't recommend it more highly to anybody who's interested in weird, retro style existential horror.
Okay.
Just very good. It's hard to describe exactly why the movie is so good.
I will check it out.
It's really good.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, all right. So we've added a new section now. We're going to start talking about some new stuff because we're a history podcast about video games, and we might as well talk about some of the current history that's been transpiring. And so the only big piece of video game news that I kind of wanted to talk about was this whole nonsense with Concord. For anybody that didn't know, Sony published this game called Concord, and it was like a hero shooter, kind of like Overwatch. And it was out for maybe like what, a month? 4 weeks?
Something like that. Yeah, less than a month, really.
And they pulled the plug on it. Like, I think it had at peak, it had like 1,700 players.
Yeah, it was very small.
Oh, yeah. And it is now being labeled as like the biggest financial like flop in video games. I think there was like, it was like was it 8 million or 18 million? I can't remember. So I got to look this up now. I can't remember what the budget was on this thing because it was like,
it was pretty large, and it was in development for years.
It had a budget of 400 million.
Jesus, that's a lot.
Yeah. On release was getting like reviews of like 62 out of 100, 65 out of 100, 3 out of 5s, like was not doing well. And then on September 3rd, Sony just pulled the plug on it. It's the even more hilarious part is in December, the people who did Love, Death, and Robots are doing something for Amazon called Secret Level, where it's
and there's a Concord episode.
So that's gonna be a little awkward.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if that episode is still going to air, or if, I don't know, they've like completely reversed course on that.
Yeah, the game only grossed $1 million.
Yeah. It's interesting because like I have mixed feelings about the Concord thing.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, I do think it's a little bit sadistic to celebrate the failure of a game.
Yeah, because people worked on that. People spent 8 years working on this thing.
Yeah. And also, we should want, good games to come out, right? I think that kind of goes without saying.
Agreed.
But I also, I recognize that Concord was, I don't know, it was a lazy decision. I mean, it's an oversaturated market, like the hero shooter, with like MOBA elements where everybody has abilities and stuff. I mean, I say this as somebody who's actually really enjoying Deadlock right now.
Right.
I just had no interest in ever playing a game like that ever again. I mean, there's Overwatch is already a thing. Marvel is now dipping their toes into this with their hero shooter.
There's like Valorant.
Yeah. I don't understand what was going through the developers' heads when they decided that making a hero shooter was a good idea.
What's interesting is like some of the development stuff I've read about where it talked about like they were like kind of independent before Sony kind of stepped in. So, and like from this is just me and like general, like, tinfoil hat is part of me wonders if Sony picked this up with the knowledge that this would fail, because apparently they had a beta and then the beta didn't do very well.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a beta that does not go well, why move forward with the game instead of like trying to, rethink or maybe pivot to something else? Unless, you've already sunk a lot into it. Like, I guess I don't know how like tax write-offs and stuff like that, like, was it more profitable for Sony to just put it out and then kill it and then be like, oh, it's tax write-off?
Yeah.
It kind of makes me think about like the whole like Batgirl situation with Warner Brothers where they just like canned it so they could write it off.
Yeah, Ubisoft with what was it, Skull and Bones?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that being a possibility.
Who knows?
I think one thing, though, that I do feel compelled to say about the whole Concord situation is I'm increasingly annoyed by conversations on the internet about how wokeness is supposedly killing the gaming industry.
Oh, yeah, because everybody was talking about like how all the characters in the game were. And
yeah, I mean, like, listen, the character design in Concord was ugly. Like, the characters looked bad. Their design was just not great. But there's a lot of people, speaking of tinfoil hats, who are really convinced that games like this that have any kind of diversity as a feature, people are increasingly convinced that it's like some kind of woke agenda behind these things that is ruining these games because they're made with an agenda in mind first and gameplay second.
Right.
I mean, it's a bizarre, really way to see the gaming industry. I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that like there are a lot of players and there are a lot of developers in the game industry who increasingly just want a more diverse cast of characters, considering that AAA games for many years have had largely, the same white dudes with short brown hair like protagonists. You look at like, Nathan Drake and Commander Shepard, even though you can customize him.
Right.
Every single Peter Parker. I mean, it's not crazy to want different looking characters. And I feel like I'm going insane because I'm now seeing people call like the Ghost of Tsushima sequel woke because it has a female protagonist instead of Jin again.
Yeah. I was reading a little bit about that the other day. It kind of takes me back to like, it was like in March with like this, was it the Sweet Baby Inc. thing?
Yeah, like that kind of stuff too, especially because many of the games that Sweet Baby Inc. worked on were actually good. Like they were consultants for Alan Wake 2 because Saga Anderson was a protagonist in that game.
Mm-hmm.
And, you had people saying Alan woke.
Yeah, that's God.
And I just feel like I'm going insane. Like I feel like the brain rot has really kind of taken root in a lot of people's minds. And I'm just kind of annoyed because I just want to enjoy the video games.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I can't. It's one of those weird things where a lot of, these same people will complain about making things political, but ultimately they're the ones now who are concerned with turning every single possible game release into a discussion about politics because they're mad that, I don't know, something is seemingly happening for the reason of diversity. But I'll get off my soapbox. I just had this conversation with my class the other day, so it's fresh in my mind.
You've had some interesting subjects that you've talked about in your class that you've talked about over the last few weeks. It's been some interesting, pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I think my students are like.
I guess another point of interest in terms of news was Tokyo Game Show was a couple of weeks ago. They announced a new Yakuza. We finally got a preview for Dizzy and Guilty Gear Strive, which I'm excited about.
Nice.
They announced that Chun-Li and Ken will be joining Fatal Fury: City of the Wolves. So
it's very cool.
I guess SNK and Capcom are on good terms.
Seems that way.
Yeah, that's.
We are forever in the Silk Song and Bloodborne on PC waiting room. But
yeah, instead we're getting what was it? Horizon.
Yeah, again, sure, fine, whatever.
Like, oh hey, here's Horizon, and of course we got another trailer for Monster Hunter Wilds.
I'm excited for that.
I actually am as well. I'm planning on picking it up when it comes out. I only played a little bit of Monster Hunter World, but I was it was enjoyable. So,
I've been playing the Monster Hunter franchise since the original, like the very first one.
Okay.
And I really liked World for streamlining the experience while also expanding it in other ways.
Right.
I know a lot of longtime fans of the series were a little bit annoyed that they got rid of all of the menial fetch quests. And to them I say, I'm older and I have responsibilities like writing a dissertation. Please do not make me spend an hour collecting dragon eggs.
Right. Like, streamline games. Yes, please.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, all right. Well, now that we've covered some news and Michael get on his soapbox for a hot second, we'll talk about our history part of the episode today. We're going to be discussing computer gaming in the late 70s and early 80s as a part of our, hey, we're still stuck in this hold pattern because we are still talking about the gaming crash and all of the stuff that was affected around it, because it still kind of was a very important event in video games. And as with most things in history, sometimes they can be a little more complicated. And the gaming crash itself was not just, oh, hey, E.T. bombed, so the gaming industry died. No, there was a lot more that happened to it. I had that conversation with someone the other day, actually. Someone was like,
"Oh yeah, thought that the game crash was caused by E.T. bombing."
Yes, exactly. Someone was like, "Oh my god, if you heard, it's like E.T. killed the gaming industry in the early '80s." And I was like, I literally put my hand on the bridge of my nose. I was like, "No, it didn't. It was merely like the thing that everybody focuses on. Please shut up."
Yeah, I would have said, "Say more. Tell me more."
Yeah, tell me how it is that a single game killed the entire gaming industry. So
that's why we do this podcast.
Yeah, to educate folks. So today we'll be going over a couple things. We're going to talk about a little prehistory, actually, that Michael has. Then we'll be doing a kind of a recap, talking about everything running up to, with a brief recap of like mainframe gaming and some home computers. We'll be talking about the IBM PC and the basic computer language, and then we'll be going into the home PCs at the time versus video game consoles, as well as this computer gaming thing and where it led us to. I hear it's a big deal. So
supposedly.
Sorry, Michael. I'll let you get started and you talk about some of the cool stuff you found about the prehistory of personal computers and computer gaming.
Yeah. So, dear listeners, if you remember from some of our earliest episodes, you will know that I am a bit of a stickler when it comes to tracing the genealogies of things, because I am convinced that history is often more complicated than definitively saying X or Y is the first example of something ever. If you remember our conversation about what the first video game is, you will remember that the answer is it's complicated.
Yeah.
Is it Tennis for Two? Is it Space War? Is it something else? I think that, history often has room for these kind of ambiguities. We don't necessarily need to be able to say that one thing or the other was technically the first, quote unquote. So before we kind of start talking about the early home computer industry with regard to its kind of parallel development history to the video game industry, I think it's important to also kind of talk about some of what might be considered the earliest examples of personal computers. A lot of the information that I'm pulling from here is actually just available online. Some of it's from the Wikipedia, some of it's from other sources. But there was a British newspaper called The Star in June at 1949 about the EDSAC computer that has this quote: the computer may one day come down to our level of the common people and help with our income tax and bookkeeping calculation. But this is speculation and there is no sign of it so far. So interestingly, you have as early as the 1940s speculation that eventually computers will be small and portable enough that people will be able to, have personal computers. And I think it's funny retrospectively to kind of look back from 2024 or hashtag current year, whenever it is that you guys are listening to this. But nowadays we walk around with literal computers in our pockets and on our wrists. So we certainly have come a long way in under a century as far as home computers and personal processing is concerned.
Yeah, technology definitely condenses really quick.
Yes. I forgot what the law is called for that. But somebody smarter than me listening to this podcast will know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Anyway, not long after that article from June 1949, we have some examples actually of what might technically be considered the first personal computers. There was a computer called the Simon that was developed by Edmund Berkeley in October of 1950. The Simon was in some sense a personal computer, although was not of much practical use. The four-functioning ALU was only 2 bits wide, meaning that it was not capable of operating on any number greater than 3. It was basically a pedagogical tool, something that hobbyists would buy in order to help teach themselves about, the operation and design of digital computers.
Okay.
Not really anything that would be commercially successful or anything that you would really consider marketable in any sense other than just being a hobbyist. After the Simon, you have examples like the LGP30 and the IBM 610, which were both vacuum tube computers. They were similar in size. The LGP30 was apparently about the size of a desk, and the IBM 610 was about the size of a large cabinet. Notably, they were both of a size that they could fit in a conventional office, and the IBM 610 apparently required no specialist arrangements for air conditioning or power. The IBM 610 was intended to be used by only one operator and was symbolically programmable using a keyboard. And importantly, one of the distinctions that I think some people point to as far as what constitutes a personal computer versus something like a mainframe computer is that it's not a time-sharing device.
Right.
We've talked about, like the history of the Play-Doh 4 in a couple of episodes here on the podcast before. And, while I think the history of the Play-Doh is very interesting, technically it doesn't count in the history of personal computers because it's a time-sharing device. You're sharing the mainframe system with other people. You have the LINC, which stands for the Laboratory Instrument Computer, produced in 1962 at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, used for biomedical research applications. It was about the size, not about the size, it could fit on a desk, and it had a keyboard input with a monitor screen constructed from an oscilloscope.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
The LINC, interestingly, was designed to be portable. You could disassemble it and fit all of the apparatus into a car and then reassemble it in what the Wikipedia calls a quote-unquote reasonable time for use elsewhere without the support of a computer lab. I'm sort of curious to know what constitutes a reasonable time in this instance.
Yeah.
I think, given the context, a reasonable time might mean a couple of hours versus, when I drive home, I just take my desktop out of my car and put it in my computer or my bedroom.
Right. Like, it's pretty easy to, get out my laptop, but, if I have to reassemble a computer that's, old. It's not like moving a mainframe back then would take like weeks.
Yeah. No, it just wouldn't be something that you did realistically unless you were moving it permanently.
Right.
It's sort of interesting. In the middle of the 1960s is when you start to see the stars kind of align for the company Intel that would form later towards the end of the decade, around 1968, I believe. Because after the Link, you have examples like the Olivetti Programma 101. It was released in 1965 by the Italian company Olivetti and was based on a preceding experimental computer produced by a young Federico Fagin, who would later design the first commercial microprocessor at Intel. Fagin is a name that sort of pops up in and around the early history of home computers. He later goes on to produce the single chip CPU in 1967, where interestingly he did a lot of work for Fairchild, but was kind of not really, I don't know, Fairchild didn't really utilize his work in the way that they could have, and so he ended up leaving and going to Intel, where he worked on some very important microprocessing chips. We'll come back to that in a second. The data point 2200 was made by the CTC, which is the Computer Terminal Corporation. The data point 2200 is among the earliest known devices that bears significant resemblance to the modern personal computer. It had a CRT screen, keyboard, programmability, and program storage. Interestingly, and I think one of the most funny details about the data point 2200 is that when CTC was designing it, they actually commissioned Intel to develop a single chip solution for a lot of the TTL logic components, which it kind of needed to integrate. In the end, the chip that Intel designed did not meet CTC's requirements and was not used. A deal was made that in return for not charging CTC for the development work, Intel could instead sell the processor as their own product, along with the supporting ICs they had developed. And later, this same chip that Intel had developed went on to become the Intel 8008, which ended up being a very commercially successful microprocessing chip, which modifications were used for other early computers. One of which in particular we've mentioned before, and Jeremy will talk about a little bit later, which is the Altair 8800, uses a version of this chip.
Yeah.
So kind of funny to look back on history and, see small examples where people had opportunities to take advantage of really good designs. There's a couple examples of that maybe we'll talk about later too, but what a big mistake from CTC, more or less.
There's a couple of those in terms of just video game history where we see somebody crop up and somebody just kind of passes on them and then they wind up exploding somewhere else down the line.
Yeah. Always sad for them, but very funny for us, of course, in 2024. And then shortly after the data point 2200, you have the Kenbach 1. The Kenbach 1 is actually, I think, maybe a very good contender for the first real personal computer. It actually is apparently considered by the museum, or the Computer History Museum, to be the world's first personal computer. It was invented by John Blankenbacher of Kenbach Corporation in 1970 and first sold in early 1971. However, the Kenbach would go on to have a very short sort of market circulation life cycle, largely because the Kenbach 1 did not actually use a microprocessor. It was built of small-scale integrated circuits. So it was very limited in functionality. It had basically no ability for expansion, and it was rendered very obsolete very quickly by sort of the advent of, affordable and mass-producible microprocessors on a small scale. So apparently only 44 machines were ever sold. It was mainly produced for educational market purposes.
It's still wild to think about, only 44 of something being sold.
Yeah. there's plenty other examples of like the early 1970s computers that could be kind of pointed to as some of the progenitors or early versions of, the first home computer. There's the Micro N, which actually uses the Intel 8008 chip, which I just mentioned earlier. This came out in 1973. The Intel Intellect, which was using a range of Intel microprocessors from the 4004 to the 8080. The 8080, by the way, which was a modified and slightly upgraded version of the 8008. And then ultimately, by the time we get to the mid 1970s, you have kind of the more commonly recognized machines that then also became more mass-produced, more successful on the market, and also popular amongst gaming hobbyists. So that's when you get to things like the Altair 8800, which I believe Jeremy is going to tell us a little bit more about right now.
So now that we have this kind of brief bit of like prehistory, now we get to talk about a little bit. We're going to kind of cover some of the ground we previously covered with some mainframe gaming, but mostly we're going to be talking about some earlier in the late 70s home computers that would have affected the game crash, because in the late crash of 78, the PC market didn't really take a hit. In fact, when the crash happens in 83, the PC market is probably one of the many factors that are included into this. So the fruit of the retail development in the early video games appeared mainly in video arcades and home consoles, but at the same time, there was a growing market in home computers. Such home computers were initially a hobbyist activity, with mini computers such as the Altair 8800 that Michael mentioned, as well as the IMSA SAI 8080, which was released in the early 1970s. Groups like Homebrew Computer Club in Menlo Park, California, envisioned how to create new hardware and software from these mini computer systems that could eventually reach a home market. Affordable home computers began appearing in the late 1970s with the arrival of the 1977 Trinity, the Commodore PET, and the Apple II and the TRS-80. Most shipped with a variety of pre-made games, as well as the basic programming language, which we'll cover here in a little bit, allowing their owners to program simple games. So you have like these earlier computers that start to become more accessible to like people at various in cost. In fact, we have like a chart somewhere that talked about like some of the cost of some of these machines.
Yeah. In Black Enterprise, the magazine.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how like the variety of these things, and then including in the book that I was reading with Masters of Doom, it talks about like how these earlier computers and these hobbyist clubs, they're like building things and, they're sharing amongst one another. So,
yeah. Some interesting comments too about that homebrew computer club that you mentioned that I found while I was researching that I just thought funny to mention. Mm-hmm. This club had such members as Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Jerry Lawson, among others. Lawson, in particular, if the name is not familiar to you, is considered the father of the video game cartridge and was actually the director of engineering and marketing for Fairchild's video game division and a lead developer for the Channel F. Longtime listeners of the podcast will know that the Fairchild Channel F was the very first video game console to ever have individually programmable cartridges. The reason you have consoles today, like the PlayStation and the Xbox, that, you have individual discs for the games or you just download them separately, is because of the Fairchild. Though it often gets overlooked in video game history because it gets overshadowed by the Atari, which comes out shortly after, also featuring cartridge technology, and doing far more successful numbers than the Fairchild did.
Yeah. Makes you wonder if Wozniak just stuck around.
Yeah, it's funny because, as you kind of suggest, apparently, as I was reading, Jerry Lawson interviewed Steve Wozniak for a job at Fairchild and did not hire him.
Man.
So it's kind of funny because Wozniak, of course, went on to be very successful at Apple. And Jerry Lawson, I'm sad to say I had not heard of until I started researching for this episode.
It's really interesting because in Masters of Doom it talks about when Jobs and Wozniak put out the I think it was the Apple One. Jobs was very much like he would get stuff, and apparently Wozniak had like a really crude sense, like a really like funny sense of humor. He sold the original Apple One for $666.66.
That's amazing.
Yeah, like this is so funny to think about. Yeah, so a little fun tidbit there about the Fairchild. But in terms of like the hobbyists, so hobbyist groups for new computers soon formed and PC game software followed. Soon, many of these games, at first clones of mainframe classics such as Star Trek, and then later ports and clones of popular arcade games such as Space Invaders, Frogger, Pac-Man, tons of Pac-Man clones, and Donkey Kong, were being distributed through a variety of channels, such as printing the game's source code in books, such as David All's Basic Computer Games magazine, as well as electronic games and creative computer, and newsletters, which allowed users to type the codes themselves. So you have this like large group of people who are really enjoying computers and learning how to like code and develop games, and then they start taking games that are popular and rebuilding them. In fact, this is how a lot of like newer games get developed. But it's really interesting to me that like people could just go somewhere, buy a book that has code to build a game on it. Like, I could just only imagine the lawsuits these days if someone was like, "Hey, do you want to play the new Far Cry game? Buy this magazine. It has the code in it that you can just type up yourself and play the new Far Cry game."
In a world where Nintendo will basically sue somebody for, breathing the wrong way about Pokemon.
Yeah.
Which is happening to Palworld.
Oh, right. Yeah, that was... Man, we left that out of the news, that Palworld finally got hit with a lawsuit.
Well, I snuck it in there.
Yeah. So it's interesting that they're, like, distributing all of this information about how to code games via, magazines and newsletters. So programmers distributed their works through physical mailing as well, and selling of floppy disks, cassette tapes, and ROM cartridges. Mainframing many computer games were still largely developed by students and others during this period, using the more powerful languages afforded to them. A team of MIT students, Tim Anderson, Mark Black, Bruce Daniels, and Dave Lebling, were inspired by Colossal Cave Adventure to create the text adventure game Zork across 1977 and 1979, and later formed Infocom to republish it commercially. Rogue, a game in which me and Michael have both played on for the channel, the namesake of the roguelike genre, was developed in 1980s by Glenn Wickman and Michael Toy, who wanted a way to randomize the gameplay of Colossal Cave Adventure. So you can kind of see here where people started like taking the ideas of games that they were probably stealing from magazines, which is hilarious to think about, and then started modifying them. And granted, one of these days we'll get around to doing an episode about Colossal Cave Adventure.
Yeah, because we basically have done enough if you cobbled together everything we've ever said about Colossal Cave Adventure, it's probably its own episode already.
But yeah. So
we could.
And not to mention, maybe at some point we might wind up doing an episode about gaming magazines in this time period, because apparently they were just selling game source codes in.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Very funny.
So you have these like entire group of like just random hobbyists who are making games and trading games for one another, and then eventually getting together and being like, "Hey, let's form a company," and then they sell games and make money off of it. So the personal computer market suddenly starts having this just kind of like almost like a groundswell of like grassroots gaming out of nowhere. So it's really interesting to think about in like that terms, where it's like how it just kind of like naturally forms out of all of this, instead of like how, consoles come out of this whole entertainment idea.
Right.
So this eventually leads us to like one of the pioneering parts that allows all of these people to create these games. And that is called the basic programming language. As well as a very important piece of equipment with the IBM PC. So this is taken from a Time Magazine article called 50 Years of BASIC, the Programming Language That Made Computers Personal. So invented by John G. Kimney and Thomas E. Kurtz of Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire, BASIC was first successfully used to run programs on the school's General Electric computer system 50 years ago. in May 1st, 1964, to be precise. So this is almost kind of fits into the prehistory that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So the two math professors deeply believed that computer literacy would be essential in the years to come and designed the language. Its name stood for Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code to be as approachable as possible. And it worked, at first at Dartmouth and then at other schools. The single most influential book in the BASIC era was not a textbook, at least not officially. It was a 101 Basic Computer Games, later known as Basic Computer Games, and edited in both versions by David H. All. The tome grew out of All's work as educational marketing manager for Digital Equipment Corporation's PDP-8 line of mini computers. Around 1971, he created the basic versions of two games that had originally been written for DEC's focal language. Hammurabi, which is governed by ancient Sumeria, and Lunar Lander, exactly what it sounds like.
Hammurabi.
Hammurabi, yeah. Quote, I wrote them from scratch more to demonstrate the machine than anything else, he says. Their popularity led to him including basic games in EDU and DEC newsletters he edited. Many of them were contributed by readers, especially high school students, in 1973, and DEC published an anthology, which will eventually become 101 Basic Computer Games. This book went onto a second printing and sold a total of 10,000 copies. That was far more books than there were computers around, so people were buying 3, 4, 5 of them for each computer, All remembers. Shortly after All left DEC in 1974, he started a magazine, Creative Computing, devoting a great deal of its space to BASIC. Then he acquired the rights to publish 101 Basic Computer Games under the title Basic Computer Games. And as with BASIC itself, Basic Computer Games predate the PC revolution, but helped propel it forward. It got updated, was translated into 6 languages, inspired multiple sequels, and became the first computer book to have sold 1 million copies. Like folk songs, its programs felt like part of a shared cultural heritage. They were passed around, mutated into multiple variants as they did so. And so this was all from 50 Years of Basics, the programming language that made computers, by Harry McCracken, Time Magazine, April 29th, 2014. So, as you can see, like, as we were mentioning with all these hobbyists, this basic computer language basically showed everybody, like, how it was done.
Right.
And the machine that helped everybody do it was the IBM PC because it was affordable and accessible, along with the Apple II. So you can see here, like in the 70s, there's all of these various ways that computers are just like quietly like working. And then eventually they have like, they reach a point of like, I guess it would be like, they reach a point of affordability to where now it's like, it's everywhere. And as we mentioned in our video game crash episode, where we overviewed all of it, there was even to a point where computers were being advertised as like the better thing to do than buying a video game console. Like, why buy a video game console that can only play games when this computer over here can, you know, help you do your taxes or, you know, type a letter, but it also can play games. So I think where gaming consoles provided that entertainment to a younger generation, PCs provided longevity for an older generation, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this kind of leads us to our what we're kind of talking about here is where the home PCs versus the video games, and how the dominance of and the affordability of PCs kind of contributed to the downfall of video games in '83, and then how things kind of went from there. So I have this quote here from the same article. It says, games dominated home computers' software libraries. In 1984, a compendium of reviews of the Atari 8-bit software used 198 pages for games compared to 167 for all others. By that year, the computer game market took over from the console market following the crash of that year. Computers offered equal ability, and since their simple design allowed games to take complete command of the hardware after powering on, they were nearly as simple to start playing as with consoles. So yeah, like it suddenly became so much easier for for outside of this hobbyist sphere, someone could easily just like pop a disc in to play a game and not need to know how to code versus you buy your console, go down the street, have to buy games for it.
Right.
And in 84, you're suddenly like, everybody's trying to offload all of these game consoles because no one wants them anymore.
Yeah.
So
it's funny because there was a brief moment, it seems, and this quote, perhaps this doesn't necessarily reflect everyone's perspective at the time, but I found this quote funny. This is from a magazine that you found, Black Enterprise, actually, which was a magazine concerning business savvy market advice for African Americans in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. The article is called "Cash In on the Video Game Craze," and it has this quote. I'll just read what the magazine says. Edward Smith, 27, a former game designer who now works as a sales representative at Castle Computers in Latham, New York, feels that as home computers come down in price, the simple game machine may soon become obsolete. Leading game manufacturers are already planning to offer hardware next year to transform the consoles into computers. So this is in 1982, where you already have some people perhaps prophesying that computers will soon cause game consoles to be obsolete. Now, Mr. Edward Smith here is a sales representative at Castle Computers, so naturally he's going to be a little bit optimistic, I think, with regard to his own industry.
Right.
But it is funny to just kind of see how wrong this prediction was. Mm-hmm. I don't think consoles are going anywhere for the time being. I mean, in 2024, PlayStation, Xbox, and the Nintendo Switch are still going strong.
Yeah.
Though it is interesting, that last little bit about companies actually offering hardware to basically turn consoles into computers is perhaps a little bit prescient, because I do think these days many people have consoles not just to play video games, but as entertainment systems.
Right.
I use my PS4, more often than not these days to watch Netflix and YouTube videos.
Or as like a Blu-ray player.
Right, exactly. And so it's funny to me because, in a way, thinking back to what computers were capable of in 1982, my PlayStation 4, which is already a last-gen console, is more capable than anything that anybody would have been buying at the time.
Yeah.
So I do think that gaming consoles, they have not disappeared, certainly, but they have, over time, I think, branched outward into machines that aren't just, gaming devices, but also just entertainment systems in general.
Yeah, and I think when you read that quote to me in our before we started recording was it's interesting that nowadays consoles are almost PC like.
Yes.
The PlayStation has a hard drive and almost a dedicated graphics card, is just as much as the Xbox does. So they've become smaller versions of full on computer PCs, except for they don't have all of the extra stuff that makes a home personal computer what it is, minus all you're not going to be using Excel on your PlayStation 5.
Certainly not.
So
at least I'm not.
Yeah, if someone out there is playing Excel on a PlayStation 5, I need to know. So yeah, with all of this history, talking about with computers, this leads us to the thing that we already know is computers eventually continue to push on. We have tons of gaming that's done on computers. In fact, this is where I was thinking about some of the stuff I read talking about with John Carmack and John Romero and Masters of Doom. They were moving around from place to place until eventually they formed id Software, which goes on to create, one of the most significant games on PC, which would have been Doom. And that game was marketed via just people handing out floppy disk. It spread via word of mouth to where the day that they released Doom 1 on a shared software site, it crashed. And including in that, in the late 80s, we start having the advent of the internet and how that's like we've already like talked about like some of the internet stuff with ARPANET and how some of the mainframes was like the early stuff, but like when the full on like World Wide Web enters the fray, like PC gaming kind of takes on a new life because now they can share games with one another without having to use a magazine or floppy disk. They can literally just put it up somewhere for people to download.
Right.
I will say there is a really hilarious section inside of Masters of Doom where it talks about I believe it's Carmack wanted an Apple II and couldn't afford it. So he basically built a bomb and blew up something to get in in the attempt to steal an Apple II.
Huh, that's bizarre.
And wound up living in like a foster home for a year.
Good Lord.
Yeah. Like, dude was a madman. Like, this book's been kind of hilarious and like fun to read just from the aspect of like seeing these two guys' lives. So, yeah, like, and then eventually, everything that happens in the 80s transitions to like, you get into the CRPG stuff starts becoming back, and you have like BioWare making all the D&D games and all the other console games that are like the PC games. Yeah. Like PC becomes like a very large force until, I think we've mentioned this many of times of how like video game consoles and PC gaming are kind of running in this parallel path next to one another. And every now and then they affect one another. And with the case of the video game crash, the home computer gaming market, or the home computers in general, really affected the home console market. It was like one of the many things that did it in. And then eventually they kind of like merge into one in the 2000s. So yeah.
And it's interesting, I think, to think about, why the prediction of PCs not completely wiping out consoles has like not come to pass.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it's certainly true that for a long time, PCs were the more powerful, systems to play games on. But I think consoles have done a good job managing their affordability, but also, there has been annoying, I think, industry politics with regard to like, console exclusives are like a big reason that I feel like consoles have continued to stay relevant.
Right.
This might sound very PC master race of me, but if you look into building your own computer, many of you who have built your own computer will know this. It is not terribly expensive if you are shopping on a budget.
Right.
I mean, I guarantee you that if you were really invested in doing so, for $500, you could build a rig that would be comparable to most gaming consoles. That might not be true anymore, actually, because I do think the latest generation of consoles is quite good.
Yeah, PS5 definitely has some get up and go.
Right. Now, there are certainly people who go overboard and will build, $2,000 computers.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that were it not for console exclusives like, Halo and Gears of War and, Street Fighter V was an exclusive for, I guess it was on PC as well.
Yeah.
It is just interesting to kind of see how that has changed a little bit over time. Now I know Xbox, almost all of its exclusives are also on PC. Many console exclusives for PlayStation are still actually now finally coming to PC. Like you can play The Last of Us and Horizon.
The Spider-Man games.
Yeah. Everything but Bloodborne, by the way.
Sony, if you're listening to us.
Understand. Sony, please. I will write my dissertation about how Sony is amazing.
If you just give us 60 frames per second PC port of Bloodborne.
Please don't make me pirate it. Please don't make me use the illegal, emulator.
Yeah.
To get 60 FPS Bloodborne.
There was a running thread, running joke on the Bloodborne subreddit of people being like, "Look, it runs on PC," and they were playing Bloodborne at like ridiculous frames, like 120 frames per second. Bloodborne, like, yeah, like, but yet we there was that leak a few years ago that they're going to put the Demon's Souls remake on PC, and I'm like, if that hits PC before Bloodborne, like, come on, Sony, it's just you could literally print money.
Yeah, it's baffling.
Meanwhile, From Software's like, we're working on a new project over here.
I support that FromSoft is in an era where they just want to keep working on new IPs at this point.
Right.
And I love them for that. But please. Anyway, this is a tangent, but
we hit this tangent like pretty much every other episode. We'll just be like, Bloodborne remake when?
Yep. When I was growing up, most of my friends were playing games on consoles, myself included. I think the real shift that sort of happened, I think for a lot of popular audiences, like when PCs sort of became, I think, more common for people to be playing on than consoles, was definitely, when I think, at least for my generation, games like League of Legends started getting really big.
Yeah.
It became very popular to, play multiplayer games online with your friends in a way that wasn't just your Halos and your Call of Duties. Because playing a MOBA with a game controller sounds horrible.
Yeah.
To me, at least.
For me, it would have been in like the 90s because Quake 3.
Yeah, that's fair.
I remember playing Quake, Diablo 2, Nox was a game, and then like that's also where I started finding all of the what's the genre? The Deus Ex and Thief. Yeah, the immersive sims. Yeah, like that's where I started finding all that stuff, and so I was already like, that's where I was at with PCs, and then getting to college and getting a computer before as I went to college that I could like play games on, and then like the real big thing was like Half-Life 2 came with Steam, and that was the tipping point. So that was, I mean, from mine. So yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've sufficiently covered a pretty decent history of the personal computer here. So do you have any final thoughts before we wrap things up, Michael?
None that I can think of, aside from once again begging Sony to put Bloodborne on PC.
My final thoughts are, give me more.
Yeah. I will say I certainly am far more of a PC gamer these days, and that's not, out of any sense of like superiority or anything. I think consoles are perfectly capable. It's just kind of my preference to play my games on PC. I like mouse and keyboard.
Yeah. All of my home consoles have always been Nintendo consoles because that's the only thing that doesn't port to PC.
Yeah. No, but that's a good question, though, is would you be playing on the Nintendo Switch if their games were available on PC?
Probably. I don't know. I really like the portability of the Nintendo Switch.
Sure. But we have the Steam Deck now, too, so.
Yeah, that is true. We'll see. Maybe one day Nintendo finally makes the jump.
That would be a sight to see.
All right. We're going to do a little bit of things here, and then we're going to wrap up. So due to some timing constraints between myself and Michael, we've been kind of busy lately, we won't be doing our October episode this month. I know y'all are sad, but don't worry. We can make up for it. But we will be doing another history episode next month, and we're finally going to be done with the video game crash. Because we're going to be talking about the people who saved video games, or supposedly that's what people say. We're going to be talking about a small startup company from Japan who originally were making toys called Nintendo.
I've never heard of them.
Yeah, no, we haven't mentioned them a few times in this episode, not at all. So we'll be doing that. Then eventually we'll have our December episode, which is always our obligatory award show, where we have a couple of fun things to talk about in terms of just like things that have happened in the year in video games, as well as just we'll talk about games we liked. We'll give out some really dumb awards. It's the most important video game award show around. it doesn't have any ads for any other future games.
Of course.
So yeah, and then we'll be in the new year. It'll be 2025. It'll be January, and we'll be wrapping up the 80s, and we'll be finally pushing our way into the 90s, where there'll be a lot of interesting things are going to happen. The 90s will probably take us a while because a lot happens in a short amount of time in video games, from the late 80s all the way through the 2000s.
Yes.
So we'll do our little plugs, and we'll call it a night. So, Michael, where can the folks find you?
I'm still on Instagram as mackerel_prawns. And that is basically the only place I am. I don't use Threads or Twitter. So
you can watch him lifting weights or...
Yeah. My current deadlift PR is 425. That's probably new since the last time we recorded an episode.
Yeah.
And I hit a 235 bench. And I haven't yet tested my 1 rep max on squats, but I got 265 for 5 the last time I attempted. So
hell yeah. So yeah, tune into his Instagram. You can watch him lift weights and post whatever music he's listening to, or his
miniatures. You can see my Blood Bowl miniatures.
Yeah. So you can find me. I'm on Twitch at twitch.tv/backwardshero. I was doing Elden Bros co-op stream with my friend Shane. It was a lot of fun. We took a small break because we got sucked into Hearthstone Battlegrounds. We will be finishing that up. You can also check out my Instagram and Facebook as Press Art F4. I'm doing my October drawings right now, which is I do a drawing every day. And this year I'm doing a story about a lich named Larry who works in IT. We'll see if I get through it. It's been fun. Also, I guess I can bring it's official now that I've paid money that there will be an art book for Press Art F4 about my drawings from last year. So I will now have my first art book. Details on how to acquire said art book will be coming. You can also find me on Cajun Greatness. We're kind of on hiatus right now, but hey, we did an episode or two. We also have a backlog. And as a whole, for the instruction booklet, you can check us out on our link tree at linktr.ee/instruction booklet. There you can find all of Michael's links, all of my links. You can also find our Twitch, twitch.tv/instruction booklet. As our build up to Nintendo, I might be playing some old Nintendo games. We'll see. You can also find us on where our episodes are posted on AYCH, on their YouTube channel, as well as their SoundCloud, on Spotify. I always repost all of these and then fire them off in every which way because I want people to listen to the show, because I think we're entertaining. And
so, I like to think so.
Yeah, I think we bring someone somewhere. Somebody's going, aha, and that person's probably our friend Griffin.
Yep.
Which he listens to every show. Thank you, Griffin.
Thank you, Griffin.
So yeah. Tune in next month as we talk about Nintendo. So that's about it. Anything else you got to add, Michael?
That'll be it.
All right. We'll talk to y'all next month.
See you guys.
See ya.